Hello. What happens when a simple joke in the wild 1880s American West turns into a life-changing truth? A lonely rancher named Daniel meets a silent Apache girl, and one careless line changes everything forever. Watch till the end to see how a joke becomes a shocking love story. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more Wild West tales. Let's get started! In the rugged plains of the American West during the 1880s, the land stretched endlessly beneath a vast, open sky. The wind carried dust across the dry earth, whispering through scattered shrubs and wooden fences. Life here was simple, but never easy. Days were long, nights were quiet, and every man depended on his strength and silence to survive. It was a place where stories were rarely spoken aloud, yet deeply lived. Among those who called this harsh land home was a rancher named Daniel, a man shaped by solitude and routine, known more for his work than his words. Daniel's ranch stood on the edge of Apache territory, where cultures met without ever fully understanding each other. He had built his life with his own hands, from the wooden cabin he slept in to the cattle he raised. Each morning began before sunrise, and each evening ended under the fading glow of firelight. He wasn't unfriendly, but he kept to himself. Out here, trust was earned slowly, and words were used sparingly. Still, despite his quiet nature, there was something in Daniel that longed for connection, even if he didn't fully realize it. Over time, Daniel had noticed her, the Apache girl who moved like a shadow along the edge of his world. She appeared without warning and disappeared just as quickly, always alone, always silent. He didn't know her name, nor did he understand her purpose, but her presence lingered in his thoughts longer than he cared to admit. She carried herself with a quiet strength, her eyes observing everything without revealing anything. There was no fear in her, no hesitation, only a calm certainty that made Daniel uneasy in a way he couldn't explain. Their encounters were rare but unforgettable. Sometimes he would spot her near the water source at dawn, gathering what she needed without a word. Other times she would pass by at a distance, her figure outlined against the golden horizon. They never spoke, yet an unspoken awareness existed between them. Daniel would pretend not to notice, but his eyes always followed her movements. It wasn't curiosity alone, it was something deeper, something unfamiliar, as if her silence spoke louder than anything he had ever heard. That evening felt no different at first. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the land as the heat of the day began to fade. Daniel was returning from a long day's work, his body tired, but his mind restless. As he approached the narrow trail leading back to his cabin, he saw her again. She stood there, still and composed, as though she had been waiting. The moment stretched between them, filled with the quiet hum of the wind and the distant call of birds heading home. Daniel slowed his steps, unsure of what to do. He had passed her before without speaking, always choosing silence over risk. But something about that evening felt different. Maybe it was the way the light framed her face, or the stillness that seemed to hold the world in place. For reasons he couldn't fully understand, he felt the urge to break that silence. A small, almost careless smile formed on his lips as he stepped closer, trying to make the moment lighter than it felt. Trying to ease his own tension, Daniel spoke with a hint of humor in his voice. "Why don't you just marry me and make life easier for both of us?" he said, the words slipping out more casually than he intended. To him, it was nothing more than a joke, a way to fill the silence, to prove to himself that this strange connection meant nothing. He let out a short laugh, expecting the moment to pass as all the others had, unnoticed and without consequence. But this time, something changed. She didn't laugh. She didn't look away or continue walking. Instead, she stood there, completely still, her gaze fixed on him. The air seemed to grow heavier, the light dimmer, as if the world itself had paused. Daniel's smile lingered for a moment before beginning to fade, replaced by a subtle confusion. He wasn't used to being taken seriously, especially not in moments like this. Yet her silence carried a weight that made his words feel different. Slowly she stepped closer, her movements deliberate and calm. There was no hesitation in her eyes, no sign that she had misunderstood him. If anything, her expression suggested the opposite. She had heard him clearly, and she had chosen to respond. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, soft but unmistakably firm. "I've been waiting for you to say that," she said, each word landing with quiet certainty. There was no trace of humor, no hint of doubt, only truth. Daniel felt something shift inside him. The lightness of his joke disappeared, replaced by a strange, unfamiliar tension. He searched her face for any sign that she was teasing him, but found none. Her eyes remained locked on his, unwavering and sincere. The simplicity of her words made them even more powerful. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a game. Somehow, without realizing it, he had stepped into something real, something far beyond a passing moment. His laughter faded completely, leaving only silence behind. For the first time in a long while, Daniel didn't know what to say. The world around him seemed quieter than before, as if even the wind had stopped to listen. He had lived his life in control, choosing when to speak and when to stay silent. But now, that control slipped through his fingers. What had begun as a harmless joke had turned into something he couldn't easily walk away from. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the last light of day casting a soft glow across the land, Daniel stood there facing a truth he hadn't expected. The distance between them felt smaller, yet the weight of the moment felt immense. He realized, slowly and almost reluctantly, that this was no longer just a passing encounter. Her words had changed. Something not just in the moment, but within him. And as the darkness began to settle in, one thought became impossible to ignore. This was no joke anymore. Daniel couldn't shake her words, no matter how hard he tried to return to his normal life. That night, as he sat alone in his wooden cabin with only the dim light of a lantern flickering against the walls, her voice kept echoing in his mind. "I've been waiting for you to say that." It wasn't the kind of sentence a man forgets easily, especially when it carried no humor, no hesitation, only certainty. He told himself it was nothing, just a strange moment on the edge of the road, but deep inside, something had already shifted. The next morning arrived with the same quiet routine the ranch always followed. The cattle needed tending, fences needed repair, and the land demanded attention as always. But Daniel's mind was elsewhere. Every task felt slower, every movement distracted. Without fully understanding why, he found himself drawn back toward the same trail where they had spoken. It wasn't planned, and he didn't question it. His feet simply carried him there, as if the land itself remembered what had happened and was guiding him back. When he reached the place, the sun was already high, casting sharp light across the dry ground. And there she was again, standing in the same calm stillness, as if she had never left. There was something unsettling about how naturally she appeared there, as though time meant nothing to her. She didn't move when she saw him. She didn't need to. It was as if she had already known he would come back, as if his return was never in doubt. Daniel slowed his steps, his throat tightening slightly. Yesterday had been confusing enough, but today felt different. The air between them wasn't empty anymore. It carried weight, memory, expectation. He tried to convince himself that he was only there to clear his thoughts, to understand what had happened, nothing more. But deep down, he already knew that wasn't true. Something about her presence made it impossible to think clearly, as if every answer he had once been certain of was now uncertain. She broke the silence first. Her voice was quiet but steady, carrying the same calm strength as before. "Did you mean what you said?" she asked. The question was simple, yet it struck deeper than he expected. It wasn't playful, it wasn't teasing, it demanded honesty. Daniel felt the weight of it immediately. This wasn't a conversation he could escape with a smile or a joke. This was something else entirely. He hesitated, looking away for a moment. In his mind, he tried to reconstruct the situation from the previous day, trying to convince himself that it had meant nothing. Just words. Just a careless moment. But standing here now, facing her again, it no longer felt like that. There was something in her eyes that refused to let him dismiss it so easily. It wasn't pressure. It was truth, quiet and unshaken. I don't even know your name, he finally admitted, almost as if that explanation could create distance between them again. It sounded reasonable in his mind. A name was simple. A name made things ordinary again, but even as he said it, he realized how weak it sounded in comparison to everything else he was feeling. She stepped closer, closing the space between them without urgency or fear. There was no hesitation in her movement, no uncertainty in her expression. She stopped just far enough for him to see her clearly, her presence calm but undeniable. Then she spoke again, her voice carrying the same steady confidence as before. "Names don't matter. Truth does." Those words settled heavily in the air between them. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He couldn't. The simplicity of her statement made it difficult to argue, difficult to escape. He had lived in a world where names, rules, and boundaries defined everything. But she seemed to exist outside of that structure, guided by something deeper, something he didn't yet understand. For a moment, neither of them moved. The wind passed through the dry grass around them, and somewhere in the distance, a bird called out across the open land. Yet everything between them felt still, suspended in a way that made time feel unimportant. Daniel found himself noticing small details he had ignored before. The way she stood grounded, the way her eyes never wavered, the way her silence wasn't empty, but full of meaning. In that moment, something inside Daniel shifted. It wasn't sudden, but it was undeniable. The joke he had made the day before no longer felt like a joke at all. It felt like a door he had accidentally opened, revealing something he wasn't prepared for. He had thought he was speaking lightly, casually, without consequence. But she had heard him differently. She had taken his words seriously because, to her, truth was never something to be treated lightly. He looked at her more carefully now, not as a passing figure in his daily life, but as someone who had stepped directly into it. There was strength in her silence, but also something else. Patience. Not the kind that waits idly, but the kind that understands time differently. It made him question everything he thought he knew about the moments they had shared. Daniel swallowed slowly, his thoughts tangled. He wanted to step back into familiarity, to treat this like something simple again. But it was too late for that. The boundary had already been crossed, even if neither of them had realized it at the time. The words were already spoken, the silence between them was already filled. And as he stood there under the vast sky, facing her steady gaze, Daniel finally understood something he hadn't expected when he made that careless joke the day before. This wasn't about humor anymore. It wasn't about passing moments or empty words. Something real had taken shape. Between them, quiet but undeniable, like the land itself watching in silence. What he thought was just a joke had already begun to change everything.